All right, welcome to The Explainer. So after the president's State of the Union, things got, well, pretty heated on at least one conservative commentary show. Today, we're going to break down their arguments, piece by piece, to really get a handle on the powerful narrative they were building for their audience.
Okay, so this quote, this is really the lightning rod for everything we're about to talk about. It's from that show Poppin' Politics, and it's the emotional heart of their whole take on the speech. So the question is, how do you get from a State of the Union address to that? Let's unpack it.
So where did they start? Well, interestingly, not with policy. It was all about conduct. They really zeroed in on what they saw as just a total lack of patriotism and, frankly, decorum from the Democrats in the room.
And here's a perfect example, a moment that really set them off. You know when the whole chamber started chanting USA for the Olympic team? Well, the hosts claimed they saw a Democratic congresswoman mouth the letters KKK in response. And that interpretation, right or wrong, became the absolute cornerstone of their argument, that for some, the chant USA is seen as the same as a hate group.
But, they didn't just say it. They decided to show it. This is where things got really theatrical. To really drive the point home, one of the hosts actually put a pillowcase over his head like a KKK hood and held up a metal chain on air. The message? This, they said, is what the Democratic Party actually wants for Black Americans. It was all about visualizing this idea of fear and subjugation.
And this theme of disrespect, it didn't just stop with patriotism. It carried right over to how they felt the military was treated. This quote right here really captures that feeling of just raw anger. They were essentially calling these officials ingrates who have no idea how good they have it.
What were they talking about specifically? They were pointing to those moments in the speech when the president was honoring decorated veterans, some with serious injuries. And the hosts argued that when some Democrats didn't stand up and clap, it wasn't just some political snub. To them, it showed a deep, fundamental disrespect for military service itself.
So you see the through line here? This idea of protecting the nation from disrespect inside the chamber? Well, that flowed right into their next big point, protecting the nation from threats outside its borders. And that, of course, led them straight to immigration and border policy.
So their whole argument on immigration really boils down to one simple core belief. A government's number one job is to protect its own citizens, period. And what they were arguing is that Democratic policies flip that completely on its head, putting non-citizens first and, as they see it, putting Americans in real danger.
And to prove this wasn't just a theory, they got really specific. They zoomed in on a sanctuary bill in Maryland. The hosts made a huge deal about how this bill would literally stop local sheriffs from working with ICE. They even brought up how some of those same sheriffs were publicly saying, hey, this is a bad idea. It's safer to transfer criminals from our jails directly to ICE than have federal agents doing raids out in the community.
So the story they're telling here is incredibly clear and, you have to admit, pretty powerful. You've got sheriffs on the front lines trying to deport criminals. Then, state politicians step in and pass a bill to stop them. For the show's hosts, this was the perfect example of politicians tying the hands of law enforcement, all to protect non-citizens.
And that idea, that phrase, handcuffing law enforcement, it wasn't just about immigration. It became the launching pad for their whole next segment, which was all about policing and what they see as the disastrous consequences of anti-police sentiment across the country.
The entire argument here was built around a specific theory called the Ferguson effect. And the idea is pretty straightforward. When police get demonized in the media and face all this intense scrutiny, they pull back. They stop being proactive. And when that happens, a vacuum is created, and violent crime rushes in to fill it.
And to back this up, they pointed to two major data points. First, they cited a 17% jump in murders in big cities right after the Ferguson protests in 2015. And second, they pointed to the period after the George Floyd protests in 2020, which they said saw the single largest one-year homicide increase in all of U.S. history.
And that's the number they kept coming back to, a 29% jump in the national homicide rate in 1 year. For them, this wasn't some random fluctuation. It was direct cause and effect, the predictable outcome of the anti-police activism that, in their view, swept the country in 2020.
And this is the real kicker to their argument, what they see as the tragic irony of it all. They argue that when the cops back off, who pays the price? It's the people living in those high-crime minority neighborhoods, the very same communities that activists say they are fighting for.
Okay, so after running through all these critiques on conduct, immigration, and policing, the hosts finally got to the bottom line. So what? What does this mean politically? They wrapped it all up by looking at the immediate fallout from the speech and who they think has the momentum now.
And they pointed to polling data like this as clear proof that the president's party had scored a major political win. They showed a big 10-point jump from 54% to 64% in viewers who felt the president's policies were moving the country in the right direction. From where they sat, the speech absolutely worked.
So coming off that perceived victory, they laid out a pretty clear game plan. What should the party do now? More rallies to fire up the base? Absolutely flood the airwaves talking about policy wins? And really focus on those kitchen table issues like gas prices? The whole point was to stay on offense, constantly rolling out new stuff to keep the opposition on their back foot.
And that's where they left it, from accusations of un-American behavior to using chains and hoods on air to connecting it all to crime stats. This reaction from Pop and Politics was just a fire hose of provocative, emotional commentary. It was all built from maximum impact. And it leaves us with a really big question to think about. What is the role of commentary like this in shaping how we all talk about politics today?